You think you're safe walking home from the county fair under the warm glow of streetlights, surrounded by the smell of fried dough and kettle corn. But on the 18th of September, 1993, 17-year-old Emily Reese took that walk and was never seen again. Subscribe, because you're about to hear a story her hometown still refuses to talk about. It was the last Saturday of summer in Maple Falls, a small town that barely showed up on state maps. The county fair had been in full swing all week, but Saturday night? That was the big one. The night the midway was packed shoulder to shoulder, teenagers roamed in packs with funnel cakes in hand, and the Ferris wheel cast its colored lights over the cornfields like some kind of neon lighthouse. Emily Reese had been there since late afternoon, working a quick shift at her aunt's lemonade stand before meeting up with her two best friends, Kelsey and Brooke. They were the kind of trio everyone in school knew, inseparable since 6th grade, each with their own personality. Kelsey, the bold one who always talked her way out of trouble. Brooke, the quiet artist. And Emily, somewhere in the middle, the one who held them together. That night, Emily wore her favorite faded denim jacket, the one she'd covered in iron-on patches from random road trips with her dad. She had exactly $12 in her pocket, enough for a corn dog, a soda, and a ride or two before her curfew at 10 p.m. Her mom, Karen, had dropped her off just after 5, reminding her for the 3rd time to be home by 10 sharp. "Don't walk alone," she'd said. Maple Falls wasn't exactly crime central, but in 2093, everyone still remembered the weird incident from 2 years earlier, when a boy from a neighboring town disappeared from a gas station and was found 3 days later, miles away, with no memory of what happened. It wasn't the kind of place where bad things usually happened, but it wasn't impossible either. The fair that night was the kind of place where time felt slippery. One moment you were laughing at the pie-eating contest, and the next you were on the tilt-a-whirl, trying not to lose your dinner. Somewhere around 8:45 p.m., Kelsey said she had to meet up with a guy she'd been flirting with all week, and Brooke was getting picked up early. That left Emily a little annoyed, but not worried. She'd walk home. It wasn't far, barely a mile, past the empty baseball field, down Pine Grove Road, and then a left onto Willow Creek Drive. She'd done it plenty of times in daylight. The last confirmed sighting came from Mrs. Lung, the librarian, who swore she saw Emily at 9:27 p.m., walking past the fairground exit, denim jacket on, holding a stuffed panda she'd won at the ring toss. She was alone, but Mrs. Lang said she looked calm, like any other teenager heading home after a fun night. What happened after that is the part no one can agree on. Some people say they heard a car engine rev near the baseball field around 9:40 p.m. Others insist they saw Emily talking to someone in the shadows near the old train tracks. But by the time the clock hit 10:15, and Karen realized her daughter still wasn't home, the night had already shifted into something dark. Karen started calling Emily's friends, but they all swore they hadn't seen her since they'd split. She called the fairgrounds, thinking maybe Emily had decided to stick around for the fireworks. Nothing. By 10:45, Karen's gut told her something was wrong. She called the police. Now, and this is where the first strange detail comes in, the responding officer didn't seem overly concerned. It was 1993. Back then, the idea of a teenager just running off was the first assumption. He told Karen to wait until morning, but by sunrise, when Emily's bed was still empty and her toothbrush untouched, the search began. And here's the thing about Maple Falls. In the 90-second news traveled fast, but not always accurately. Within hours, stories were flying around. Emily had been seen getting into a red pickup truck. Emily had been spotted at the diner on Route 6. Emily had been arguing with her ex-boyfriend near the parking lot. The police tried to sort fact from rumor, but the truth was slippery. By noon, they'd organized a search party. Volunteers combed the roads and ditches between the fairgrounds and her house. Nothing. Not a shoe, not a hair clip, Not even that stuffed panda. The first official clue, if you could call it that, came on Monday morning, when a man walking his dog near the creek found Emily's denim jacket snagged on a branch. No tears, no blood, just there. And here's where things get even stranger. The jacket was dry. The creek bank was muddy from a recent rain, but the jacket looked like it had just been pulled from a closet. Police couldn't figure out how it got there, without signs of it being dragged or dropped. From that point on, the investigation split in two directions. One theory, Emily had been abducted by someone passing through town. The other, whoever took her, was someone she knew. But the deeper they dug, the more the town started closing ranks. Neighbors who'd been quick to talk on day one suddenly had nothing else to add. People who claimed to have seen her that night couldn't remember specifics. Even her closest friends seemed cautious. And that's where this story really starts to unravel. Because the more you learn about Emily's last night, the more you realize that nothing in Maple Falls was as simple as it seemed. By Tuesday morning, the disappearance of Emily Reese wasn't just a family emergency, it was a town-wide obsession. The Maple Falls Gazette printed her photo across the front page. Grainy but recognizable. Brown hair in a loose ponytail, freckles dusted across her nose, that denim jacket with the iron-on patches. Underneath, the headline read, "Local Teen Missing After County Fair." Detective Alan Brewer, a 17-year veteran of the County Sheriff's Department, was assigned to lead the case. Brewer had a reputation for being stubborn in the best and worst ways. Once, he'd spent 6 months tracking down a stolen tractor, purely because he didn't like loose ends. In the Reese case, that same persistence kicked in fast. His first move was to retrace Emily's steps. The fairgrounds were still up, half the rides disassembled, the smell of fried food lingering in the dirt. He found the lemonade stand where she'd worked that evening. Her aunt, Donna, told him Emily had clocked out at 6:02 p.m., changed into her jacket, and left to meet her friends. Kelsey and Brooke's statements were straightforward, at least on paper. They'd spent about 2 hours together, playing games, riding the Gravitron, eating corn dogs. Then, around 8:45, they split. Kelsey met up with a guy named Ryan who'd been working the dart booth, and Brooke's older brother picked her up. Neither claimed to know what Emily did after that. But Brewer noticed something. When he asked them separately about Emily's mood, they hesitated. Brooke finally admitted she seemed distracted, like she kept checking the time. That didn't sound like the Emily her friends described, someone who usually hated schedules. The next lead came from a retired truck driver named Harold Hank Dobbs, who'd been sitting on a bench near the fairground exit at around 9:30 p.m. He swore he saw Emily talking to a man in a dark hoodie. They weren't yelling, Hank said, but it wasn't casual either. She looked like she was trying to make a point, hands moving, that kind of thing. When Brewer pressed for details, height, build, face, Hank squinted like he was trying to see it again. Could have been mid-22nd, maybe older, tall, not from around here. Brewer asked how he knew that last part. Hank shrugged. Around here I know everybody. But here's the kicker. No one else reported seeing that man. Not a single other witness. By Wednesday, the search had expanded into the nearby woods and farmland. Volunteers on ATVs, police with dogs, even a borrowed helicopter from the state police. They found nothing. Brewer hated nothing. Nothing meant he was missing something. That night, while reviewing the case files in his office, Brewer spotted a small note in the margins of one of the early reports. It was from Officer Daniels, the first responder. It read, "Mother mentioned possible stalker follow-up." Stalker? This was the first Brewer had heard of it. He called Karen Reese. She hesitated, like she didn't want to make a big deal of it, but finally admitted that 2 weeks before Emily disappeared, she'd gotten a hang-up call at home. Then, a few days later, Emily came home from school saying she felt like someone was following her. Karen chalked it up to teenage nerves. She didn't seem scared, just uneasy, Karen said. Brewer didn't believe in coincidences. On Thursday morning, he got his first break-a-tip from a gas station attendant named Mark O'Neill, who claimed he saw a girl matching Emily's description at around 10:05 p.m., the night she disappeared. She was in the passenger seat of a red pickup truck. The driver, a man in his late 22nd with a scruffy beard, paid for gas in cash and left without saying much. Now, remember, one of the earliest rumors had been about a red truck. Brewer pulled security footage, but this was 1,993 cameras were fuzzy, black and white, and often taped over after a week. Still, he got enough to make out the shape of the truck and what looked like a partial license plate, 3G7. He ran the plate through the DMV database. 3 partial matches came up in the county, but only one owner fit the vague description, a man named Jason Carr, 29, who lived about 15 miles away in a rundown trailer on the edge of a logging property. When Brewer and his partner knocked on Carr's door, the man who answered fit the gas station attendant's description almost too well. Carr claimed he'd been home all night on the 18th of September. When asked about the truck, he said it had been broken down for weeks. Brewer didn't buy it, but without proof, he couldn't push further. Then came another strange twist. A week after Emily vanished, a local farmer found something half buried in the dirt at the edge of his soybean field, a stuffed panda. The same stuffed panda Mrs. Lang had seen Emily carrying. It was dirty, its ear torn, but still recognizable. The farmer swore it hadn't been there the day before, and here's what really bothered Brewer. The field was more than 4 miles from where Emily was last seen. If she'd dropped it while walking, it wouldn't have ended up there. Someone had placed it, and that someone wanted it to be found. From that moment on, Brewer stopped thinking of Emily's case as a straightforward disappearance. He started thinking of it as a game won, where the other player was always 2 moves ahead. By the second week after Emily Reese vanished, Maple Falls no longer felt like Maple Falls. The front doors of the grocery store were plastered with missing posters, Emily's face staring back at you from every bulletin board and telephone pole. The post office had a stack of flyers right by the counter. Even the church had one taped to its wooden doors, the ink already curling from the late September humidity. But behind all that concern, there was a quiet shift. People had stopped talking to each other in the open. Whispers now happened in parking lots, in the far corners of the diner, out of earshot of police. The official search was still active, but for the first time, the questions started turning inward, not who took Emily, but which one of us could have done it. Detective Alan Brewer was feeling it too. The tips had slowed to a trickle, and every promising lead seemed to dissolve under scrutiny. That man in the hoodie? No one else had seen him. The red pickup truck? The partial plate turned up nothing solid. Even the stuffed panda, the one found in the farmer's field, had no fingerprints. Whoever was responsible either knew exactly what they were doing or had been incredibly lucky. And then there was the problem Brewer hated most: the friends. Kelsey and Brooke had given their statements early on, but something about them kept nagging at him. It wasn't just what they'd said it was, what they hadn't. They were careful, too careful. When Brewer asked Kelsey again about the moment they split from Emily, she gave the same time, 8:45 p.m. But this time, she added a detail. She said she might stop by the old train depot before heading home. That was new. The depot was a crumbling brick building, abandoned since the late 72nd, when the freight line shut down. It was the kind of place kids used for parties or dares. Why hadn't Kelsey mentioned this earlier? Brewer asked her directly. "I didn't think it mattered," she said, eyes darting away. Brooke's interview was just as frustrating. She insisted she'd gone straight home, but when Brewer pressed about Emily's mood that night, Brooke paused a little too long before answering. She was distracted, like she was thinking about something else. 2 friends, 2 subtle shifts in their stories. Brewer couldn't prove they were lying, not yet. but the feeling in his gut told him they weren't giving him everything. Meanwhile, the town was starting to turn on the Reese family in quiet, cruel ways. At the diner, Karen overheard someone mutter that Emily had probably run off with a boyfriend and was just too embarrassed to call. At the post office, another woman leaned in and whispered, "Sometimes kids don't want to be found." Karen didn't yell. She didn't cry. She just went home and closed the blinds. The pressure wasn't just emotional, it was procedural. The county sheriff's office was stretched thin, and Brewer had already been told by his captain that without new evidence, resources would be scaled back. "We can't keep chasing ghosts," the captain said, like Emily was a ghost already. And then came the rumor that almost derailed the entire case. On the morning of the 29th of September, a local radio host claimed on air that a source close to the investigation had told him Emily was last seen getting into a car belonging to her ex-boyfriend. That wasn't true. The police had never confirmed such a thing, but by lunchtime, the rumor had spread across the county. Emily's ex, 19-year-old Matt Donnelly, was instantly under the microscope. Matt worked part-time at a car repair shop and had broken up with Emily 3 months earlier. According to friends, it hadn't been messy, but rumors have their own momentum. Reporters showed up at the shop. Neighbors gave him side-eye in the grocery store. Matt himself called the sheriff's office, furious, demanding to clear his name. Brewer brought him in for questioning. Matt's alibi was solid. He'd been at his cousin's bachelor party that night, surrounded by half a dozen witnesses who backed him up. Still, the damage was done. Matt stopped going out in public. He stopped answering the phone. Brewer made a note in his file. "Rumor cost us community trust." It was around this time that another strange lead surfaced. A man named Carl Jensen, who lived on the outskirts of town, claimed he saw someone walking along County Road 12 at about 10:20 p.m., the night Emily disappeared. When Brewer asked for details, Carl shrugged. Might have been a girl, might have been a boy. Couldn't tell from the headlights. "Then why call it in?" Brewer asked. Carl leaned forward. "Because whoever it was, they weren't walking toward town. They were headed toward the woods." The woods he was talking about stretched for miles, ending at a series of old limestone quarries filled with deep, cold water. Brewer had a bad feeling about those quarries. They were dangerous even in daylight. He sent a search team. For 2 days, officers and divers combed the quarry area. They found nothing. But on the second day, one of the divers mentioned something odd. About 50 yards from shore, lodged between 2 rocks underwater, was a sneaker. It was a white Reebok, women's size 7. Karen confirmed Emily had owned a pair just like it, but she couldn't be certain it was hers. The tread was worn smooth, and the water had washed away any trace of DNA. The sneaker was bagged and logged, but without proof it belonged to Emily. It became just another piece of the puzzle that might not even fit. By now, Brewer was feeling the squeeze from all sides. The press wanted updates he didn't have. The captain wanted progress he couldn't produce. And Karen just wanted her daughter back. Late one night, sitting alone in his office, Brewer stared at the evidence board. Emily's photo was at the center, surrounded by maps, timelines, and handwritten notes. Every clue felt like it could mean something and nothing at the same time. That's when he noticed something he'd somehow overlooked before. The timeline between 9:27 p.m., when Mrs. Lang saw Emily, and 10:05 p.m., when the gas station sighting occurred. That was 38 minutes unaccounted for. 38 minutes where Emily could have gone anywhere, met anyone, disappeared without a trace. Brewer underlined the time gap in red ink. That's where he'd start again. Because if he couldn't figure out those 38 minutes, he'd never figure out what happened to Emily Reese. Detective Alan Brewer had been working the case for just over 2 weeks when he decided to stop chasing every new rumor and start focusing on the most tangible lead he had: Jason Carr, the man with the red pickup truck. The gas station sighting still nagged at him. The partial license plate, the scruffy driver, the timing, all of it matched Carr. And even though Carr claimed his truck had been broken down that night, Brewer knew small-town lies when he heard them. So, he set up surveillance. For 3 nights in a row, Brewer and his partner, Detective Ramos, parked an unmarked sedan down the road from Carr's trailer. It was a miserable stakeout, the kind where the windows fogged up from their own breath, and every movement outside felt bigger than it was. Carr didn't do much. He smoked on his porch. He fed a mangy-looking dog. Once, he drove into town for groceries. But on the 3rd night, around 1:15 a.m., Brewer saw something that made him sit up straight. Carr came out of the trailer wearing a black hoodie, got into the red pickup, the same one he claimed had been broken down, and drove off without turning on his headlights until he was halfway down the dirt road. Brewer followed from a distance. Carr didn't go far, just 6 miles to an old service road that led into the woods. He parked, killed the lights, and disappeared into the tree line. "What the hell is he doing out here?" Ramos muttered. They waited. 10 minutes passed, then 20, then 30. Finally, Carr emerged, empty-handed, got back in the truck, and drove home like nothing happened. Brewer didn't confront him that night. He wanted more, but the next morning, he sent a search team to the service road. That's where they found the box. It was a small, rusted metal toolbox, half buried under a layer of leaves about 20 yards into the woods. Inside were 3 items: a pocket knife with a wooden handle, a silver necklace with the letter E charm, and a ticket stub from the Maple Falls County Fair, dated the 18th of September, 1993. Brewer's stomach dropped when he saw the necklace. Karen Reese confirmed Emily owned one just like it, a birthday gift from her grandmother. Carr was brought in for questioning immediately. In the interrogation room, Carr stuck to his story. He had nothing to do with Emily's disappearance. As for the necklace and the knife, "Never seen 'em before," he said. When asked why he'd been in the woods at 1:15 a.m., he shrugged. "I hunt. I set traps. That's my land." Except it wasn't his land. The service road and the surrounding woods were part of county property. Brewer pressed harder. "Why lie about the truck being broken down?" Carr smirked. "Guess I didn't want you snooping around." That was as close to a confession as Brewer was going to get, but still, it wasn't enough. There were no fingerprints on the necklace or the knife. The ticket stub had been damp and unreadable for prints. Without direct evidence linking Carr to Emily, the DA wouldn't file charges. And then, almost as if on cue, something else happened. 3 days after Carr's release, a letter arrived at the sheriff's office. It was handwritten in blocky, uneven letters. No return address. Inside was a single sentence: "You're looking in the wrong place." No signature. The envelope had been postmarked from a town 40 miles away, but Brewer wasn't convinced the sender actually lived there. He had the handwriting analyzed, but the results came back inconclusive. It didn't match Carr's but it also didn't match anyone in the sheriff's criminal database. The letter rattled Brewer not because of what it said, but because of what it implied. Whoever wrote it knew the investigation was zeroed in on Carr. That meant they were either close to the case or close to Emily. Karen Reese, meanwhile, was losing patience. She started knocking on doors herself, asking neighbors if they'd seen or heard anything the night Emily disappeared. Some avoided her. Others invited her in for coffee and whispered theories about strangers in town, about the old train depot, about things that had nothing to do with the official investigation, but everything to do with how people felt. One neighbor, an older man named George Wilkins, told Karen something Brewer hadn't heard before. "The night Emily went missing, I heard a scream. Just one. Short. Around 10 o'clock. I thought it was kids messing around." When Brewer asked why George hadn't reported it earlier, the old man looked down at his hands. Didn't think it mattered. Figured if it was important, somebody else would say something. Brewer marked it down. 10 o'clock. right in the middle of Emily's 38-minute gap. The next step was obvious. He had to go back to the depot. When the search team swept the area the first week, they found nothing but broken glass and old beer cans. But Brewer wanted another look, especially in the light of George's statement. The depot was worse than he remembered: roof sagging, weeds growing through the floorboards, graffiti covering every inch of wall space. In one corner, half buried under a pile of rotting plywood, Brewer spotted something metallic. It was a small key, the kind you'd use for a padlock. On the head of the key, scratched into the metal, were the initials ER. Brewer's pulse quickened. Was it Emily's? A friend's? Just a coincidence? The key was sent to the lab. While waiting for results, Brewer couldn't shake the feeling that this case wasn't just about finding a missing girl anymore. It was about untangling a web that touched nearly everyone in Maple Falls, whether they wanted to admit it or not. And somewhere in that web was the person who knew exactly where Emily Reese was. By now, 3 weeks had passed since Emily Reese vanished, and Detective Alan Brewer had a problem he didn't want to admit out loud. Jason Carr might not be the guy. Oh, Brewer still didn't trust him. The midnight trip to the woods, the necklace, the truck, none of that sat right. But every time he tried to picture the night Emily disappeared, something didn't fit. Carr didn't seem like the type to blend in at a crowded fair without anyone noticing. Whoever took Emily, Brewer was starting to think they had been close enough to her to not raise an eyebrow. That thought brought him back to Kelsey and Brooke. From the start, their stories had been solid, too solid. Brewer knew that when teenagers witnessed something they shouldn't, details slipped, times changed, facts got fuzzy. But Kelsey and Brooke's accounts stayed locked, word for word, like they'd practiced them. So Brewer decided to dig deeper into their lives, starting with Kelsey. She had a reputation in school for being loud, confident, a little reckless. Teachers liked her, but she wasn't the type to back down from a fight. Brewer pulled her phone records, nothing unusual. But when he asked around, one of her classmates mentioned something curious. The night before Emily disappeared, Kelsey and her got into an argument. The classmate didn't know what it was about, only that Emily had left the cafeteria early, looking upset. Brewer called Kelsey in again. This time, he didn't let her settle into her usual rhythm. He cut straight to it. What was the fight about? Kelsey's eyes went wide. What fight? The one in the cafeteria, the day before she went missing. She shifted in her seat, crossing her arms. It wasn't a fight. We just disagreed about something. What? Kelsey hesitated, then said, she was thinking about meeting up with someone after the fair. Someone older. I told her it was a bad idea. That was new, Brewer pressed. Who was she meeting? Kelsey shook her head. She never said. Just that it wasn't anyone's business. That conversation stuck in Brewer's head like a splinter. If Emily had been planning to meet someone that night, it explained the distracted behavior Brooke had mentioned. But it also meant the last people to see her, her closest friends, might have known more than they were letting on. When Brewer turned his attention to Brooke, the quiet one, he found something even stranger. Her father had been cleaning out the family's old camcorder tapes when Brewer visited. The tapes dated back years: birthdays, school plays, family barbecues. Brewer almost didn't bother looking, until Brooke's father mentioned, "There's one from the fair, the night Emily disappeared." Brooke filmed a few minutes before she left. Brewer's chest tightened. "Can I see it?" The footage was grainy but clear enough to make out the fairgrounds in all their chaotic glow. Kids darting between booths, the Ferris wheel turning in the distance, music blaring from the tilt-a-whirl. Brooke's camera panned over the crowd before focusing on Emily. She was smiling, holding the stuffed panda, waving at the camera. She looked happy, but there was something else. Over Emily's left shoulder, just barely in the frame, stood a tall man in a dark hoodie. His face was obscured by the angle, but Brewer recognized the stance. Hands in pockets, shoulders slightly hunched forward. The same description Hank Dobbs had given. The camera lingered for only a second before Brooke moved on to film something else. Brewer rewound it, played it again. "Did you know this man?" he asked Brooke. She shook her head. I didn't even notice him until you pointed it out." Brewer took the tape back to the station and had it digitized, zooming in on the figure. The image was too blurry to ID, but one thing stood out. The man wasn't looking at the rides or the games, or even at Brooke holding the camera. He was looking directly at Emily. Brewer froze the frame. Whoever this man was, he had been close enough to follow her out when she left the fair, and that meant he was one of the last people to see her alive. Still, there was another problem. When Brewer showed the footage to Kelsey, her reaction was quick, too quick. "Yeah, I saw him. He was hanging around the ring toss booth earlier. Emily talked to him for like a second. She said he was asking for directions or something." "Why didn't you mention this before?" Brewer asked. "I didn't think it mattered. I mean, she didn't seem scared." Brewer leaned back in his chair. "And you never saw him again?" Kelsey shook her head. Brewer didn't say it, but he was starting to think Emily's friends had been keeping him away from something bigger than teenage gossip. And that man in the hoodie, whether he was a stranger or someone they all knew, was the thread that could unravel everything. 2 days later, the lab results on the small key from the train depot came back. No fingerprints, but the metal showed signs of heavy wear, like it had been used frequently. The teeth on the key matched the pattern for a specific kind of padlock, the kind often used on storage units. Brewer pulled every storage facility record within a 50-mile radius. One rental stood out. Unit number 14, rented to Brooke's older brother. The same brother who had picked her up from the fair that night. When Brewer asked Brooke about it, she went pale. "That's just where he keeps his old tools and hunting gear," she said quickly. It's nothing to do with Emily." Maybe it wasn't, but maybe it was exactly what Brewer had been looking for. And he was about to find out. Detective Alan Brewer had opened a lot of storage units over the years, repossessed ones, abandoned ones, some that smelled so bad you knew what you'd find before the lock even came off. But this was different. Unit number 14 was about 8 feet wide, 10 feet deep, and rented under the name of Evan Miller, Brooke's older brother. On paper, it was perfectly ordinary, paid up to date, no complaints from the facility. But the fact that the key found at the abandoned train depot fit this unit's lock was enough for Brewer to sign the search warrant himself. The morning of the search, Brewer brought 2 uniformed officers with him. The metal door rattled as it rolled up, the sound echoing in the cold air. Inside, at first glance, it looked like a typical catch-all: dusty boxes, an old lawnmower, camping gear piled in a corner. But Brewer had learned long ago that the most important things were usually tucked away where you wouldn't notice them. He started with the boxes. The first held Christmas decorations. The second, tools and extension cords. The third was where it got strange. Inside were neatly folded women's clothes. Jeans, sweaters, a denim jacket with iron-on patches. Brewer's heart gave a sharp, cold thud. The jacket looked identical to the one Emily Reese had been wearing the night she disappeared. Karen Reese confirmed it within hours. It was her daughter's closest. One of the patches, a faded yellow daisy, had been sewn on crooked because Emily had done it herself. There was no mistaking it. Underneath the clothes was a shoebox filled with small personal items: hair ties, friendship bracelets, a few Polaroids of Emily and her friends taken over the summer. One of the Polaroids made Brewer stop it, showed Emily at the county fair, smiling at the camera, with the man in the hoodie standing in the background, just out of focus. Brewer felt his pulse in his throat. He had enough to bring Evan Miller in. When they sat down across from each other in the interrogation room, Evan looked calm, too calm. He was 24, lean, with the kind of quiet confidence that made him seem older. "How long have you had that storage unit?" Brewer asked. "Couple years," Evan replied. "You know why we're here?" I heard you found some stuff, but that's not mine. I loaned the unit to a friend a while back. What friend? Evan leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. Don't remember his name, just a guy I knew from the quarry. Brewer let the silence hang. It was a trick that worked sometimes, make the suspect fill the space. But Evan didn't flinch. You're telling me, Brewer said slowly, that your little sister's best friend vanished, and somehow her clothes and personal items ended up in your storage unit, and you don't know how? That's what I'm saying. Brewer wanted to slam his hands on the table. Instead, he slid the Polaroid across to Evan. You recognize him? Evan glanced down, then shrugged. Nope. Brewer studied him. No twitch, no blink, nothing. Either Evan was innocent, or he'd been rehearsing this for a long time. Without enough to hold him, Brewer had to let Evan go. But now, the investigation had two possible tracks: the mystery man in the hoodie, and the possibility that someone close to Emily, maybe in her own circle, had played a part. That night, Brewer stayed late at the station, going over every piece of evidence again. He kept coming back to the Polaroid. The angle was strange, like it had been taken quickly, without posing. And the man in the background there was something about his build, his posture. Brewer pulled the surveillance footage from the gas station sighting of the red pickup. The quality was terrible, but side by side with the Polaroid, there were similarities in the stance. Could it be the same man? If it was, then maybe Jason Carr wasn't entirely off the hook after all. Before Brewer could dig deeper, something else came in, something that made his skin crawl. It was another letter, same blocky handwriting as before, same lack of return address. This time, it said, "You've got her jacket, now find the rest." There was no signature. No one outside the department knew about the jacket yet. That meant whoever wrote the letter either had inside knowledge or was the one who had put it there in the first place. The postmark was from Maple Falls this time. Brewer ordered a canvass of every mailbox in town, but it was like chasing smoke. What the letter did give him, though, was a chilling new certainty. This wasn't just an abduction. This was a game, and the person playing it was watching him work. By the end of the week, Brewer had his first solid break in nearly a month. A tip from a delivery driver who'd been on Pine Grove Road the night Emily vanished. "I saw a girl walking," the driver said. "She matched the photo on the posters, but she wasn't alone. There was a man walking behind her, maybe 20 feet back." What time was this? A little after 9:30. That placed the sighting between Mrs. Lang's account and the gas station sighting, right in the middle of Emily's 38-minute gap. And if the driver was right, she hadn't been walking home alone. Detective Alan Brewer had been staring at the map of Maple Falls so long, the street names were starting to blur. But the delivery driver's sighting lit up something in his mind, a new route. If Emily had left the fair around 9:27 p.m., it'd been seen walking on Pine Grove Road a few minutes later, and a man was behind her, then maybe she never even made it to the baseball field where the engine rev was heard. Brewer traced the route from the fairgrounds to the spot where the driver claimed he saw her. It passed right by the old train depot. That's when it hit him. The depot wasn't just a creepy hangout, it was the perfect place to intercept someone without being seen. He pulled the statements from Kelsey and Brooke again, reading them line by line. Brooke had left with her brother at 8:45 p.m. Kelsey claimed she stayed until almost 9 before meeting up with Ryan at the dart booth. Neither had technically been with Emily when she left. And yet both had insisted she was planning to walk straight home. So why did Kelsey suddenly tell him weeks later that Emily might stop at the depot? Brewer decided to pay Ryan, the dart booth worker, a visit. Ryan was nervous from the moment Brewer walked in. "I told you everything I know," he said before Brewer even asked a question. "Funny," Brewer said, "because I don't remember asking yet." Under pressure, Ryan admitted that Kelsey had come to see him around 8:50, but she hadn't stayed long. She'd been looking around, scanning the crowd, like she was waiting for someone. Then she left alone. Brewer's pulse quickened. If Kelsey had left before 9, she could have easily reached the depot before Emily and whoever was following her. But the question was why. The next break came from a source Brewer never expected: the State Crime Lab. They'd retested the necklace found in Jason Carr's box using a newer, more sensitive method. And this time, they got something: a partial DNA profile. It didn't match Carr. It matched Evan Miller. That was the crack Brewer had been waiting for. He brought Evan back in, this time armed with the lab results. "Your DNA is on the necklace," Brewer said flatly. Evan didn't flinch, but his jaw tightened. "So what? Brooke was friends with Emily. She came over all the time. Maybe I handled it once." "Funny," Brewer said. "Because your sister says Emily never took it off. Ever." Silence. Brewer leaned forward. "Here's what I think happened. Emily planned to meet someone at the depot that night. Someone older. Kelsey knew and tried to talk her out of it. But you, Evan, you showed up instead. Maybe you thought it was just a talk. Maybe it wasn't. But by the time you left that depot, Emily wasn't walking home anymore." Evan shook his head. "You can't prove that." But Brewer was already watching the flicker in his eyes. The kind of flicker you only saw when someone's mind was replaying something they didn't want to remember. The final piece came from a second witness Brewer hadn't been able to track down until now: a man who lived in a small house just beyond the depot. He told Brewer that on the night of the 18th of September, 1993, he heard a loud thud outside around 9:45 p.m. When he looked out the window, he saw a man lifting something or someone into the back of a red pickup truck. The man was wearing a black hoodie. The driver's face was obscured by the shadows, but the witness noticed one thing: a jagged scar running along his jawline. Brewer didn't need to check the files to know Evan Miller had that scar. With that statement, plus the DNA evidence, Brewer finally had enough for an arrest warrant. When deputies went to Evan's house, he didn't resist. He just stood on the porch, cigarette in hand, watching them pull up. But here's the part that still haunts Brewer, and maybe always will. Even after hours of questioning, even after being confronted with every piece of evidence, Evan never admitted to what happened to Emily. No location, no explanation, no closure. In the official record, Emily Reese is still listed as missing. But off the record, Brewer knows she never left that depot alive. And in a box on his desk, sealed and labeled, sits the last thing she ever wore: a denim jacket with a crooked yellow daisy patch. The arrest of Evan Miller hit Maple Falls like a thunderclap. For weeks, the whispers in the diner and the grocery store had been about strangers, drifters, and men who didn't belong. Now, the suspect was someone born and raised right here. Someone whose face was in the yearbooks, whose family still lived down the road. At first, people didn't believe it. Evan? Brooke's brother? It didn't fit the story they'd been telling themselves, that monsters only came from outside. Karen Reese didn't speak publicly at first. When she finally did, her voice was steady, but her hands trembled. "I want to thank Detective Brewer and everyone who searched for my daughter," she said into the cluster of microphones. "But I also want to be clear. My Emily is still out there somewhere, and I will not stop until she's home." It was the kind of thing that made the evening news. What the cameras didn't show was how, after the reporters left, Karen sat in her car in the station parking lot for nearly an hour, staring at the windshield, unable to start the engine. The trial never happened. Evan's defense attorney argued that the DNA on the necklace didn't prove murder, only that Evan had touched it at some point. Without a body, without a confession, and with the witness unable to positively identify his face that night, the DA had to settle for lesser charges: obstruction of justice, possession of stolen property. 3 years. That's all he got. By the time he walked free, the fairgrounds had been moved to a new location. The old train depot was demolished, and most people in Maple Falls had learned to stop mentioning Emily's name. Not because they'd forgotten, but because the silence was easier. Detective Alan Brewer never really let it go. Even after he retired, he kept a box of Emily's case files in his garage. Every so often, he'd take it down, flip through the Polaroid, the letters, the crime scene photos. Sometimes he thought about driving out to the quarries again. Sometimes he did. The letters still bothered him the most. "You're looking in the wrong place. You've got her jacket. Now find the rest." Who wrote them? Were they taunting him? Or trying to help? And if it wasn't Evan, if someone else had been watching all along, where were they now? Karen never moved away. Her porch light still burned every night, even when the rest of the street was dark. Every September, on the anniversary of Emily's disappearance, she tied a yellow ribbon to the mailbox. The last time Brewer visited her, years after the case went cold again, she showed him something she kept in a drawer. It was a folded-up note, handwritten, no return address. It said, "I saw her that night. She wasn't alone. No name, no date." When Brewer asked when she'd received it, Karen just looked out the window and said, "The week after you retired." He left that day with a knot in his stomach because he knew the truth that no one wanted to say out loud. Someone in Maple Falls still knew exactly what happened to Emily Reese. And they were still out there. If you've been here from the start of this story, you already know the questions that will never go away. Who was the man in the hoodie? Why did Emily agree to walk alone? And what happened in those 38 minutes that no one will talk about? Maybe one day we'll get answers. Or maybe, like so many small-town mysteries, it will stay locked away in the shadows, passed down in whispers, fading a little more with each passing year. Until then, Emily's story is a reminder. Some roads you walk down, you never come back from. If you want more cases like this, stories that refuse to let go, hit subscribe and click the next video that just popped up on your screen, because the next story might be the one that keeps you up tonight.